will all Israel be saved? That's the question. God has said such is the case, but Paul's opponent, objector, in Romans 9, doubts this promise of God. If Israel is not saved, the objector reasons, when God has promised that it will be so, then one may also say that God has broken His promise, that His word or oath or promise has failed. That is, it has not come to fruition, has not taken no effect. Paul takes these views of the matter. Chart number 71. Paul's propositions in Romans 9 are these. It is true, Paul affirms, that all the physical descendants of Israel and Abraham are not, nor will they be saved. He also affirms, one of his propositions is, all Israel, that is, all the seed of Abraham, will be saved. Thirdly, one of his propositions is, the word and oath of God will be completely fulfilled, completely successful, completely effectual. Fourthly, he affirms that the terms Israel and seed of Abraham do not refer to all the physical descendants of Abraham and Israel, to the members of the elect nation. Fifthly, the terms Israel and seed of Abraham refer to those individuals among Israel and the Gentile nations who have come to believe in Jesus. And sixth, this remnant of Israel and the nations were the true elect, the true Israel, their believing in Jesus being the proof of their election. Paul takes the negative against the proposition being affirmed by his objector, which proposed that the Word of God has taken none effect or has failed. Thus, Paul was saying to his objector, God has not gone back on His promise of salvation. His Word has not failed to take effect, just as He promised. His Word has not failed to save all to whom the promise was made. Now, Paul agrees with his objector that God had made promises to Israel and to the seed of Abraham pertaining to their eternal inheritance. But he tells his objector that his syllogism, give me chart 72, is not valid because his objector is not properly interpreting the terms Israel and the seed of Abraham correctly. Here's the thinking of his opponent. And his opponent's thinking logically, having premises in his mind and a conclusion. His objector says, well, God's promised that He would infallibly save Israel and the seed of Abraham. In just a minute, we'll see a verse from the Old Testament that Paul has in mind on that point. Well, too, this objector says, obviously, Israel, the seed of Abraham, has not been saved. In fact, Paul, you're preaching that they all won't be saved. That is, all the physical nation. And so the conclusion in the objector's mind is, well, God's broken His promise. God's failed. His Word has failed. Now, Paul does not deny the truthfulness or validity of either the major or minor premise 1 and 2. What Paul objects to, however, is how the terms Israel and seed of Abraham are being interpreted, or what they designate. That's the point. Now, I want to read to you verses 6 through 8. We've already established the first 5 verses are talking about salvation. For they are not all Israel which are of Israel, neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they all children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called, that is, they which are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted or reckoned by God for the seed. My opponent agrees then that the first 6 verses of Romans 9 is talking about salvation. Or I should say, are talking about salvation. Get my case right there. He agrees that Paul is lamenting the lost condition of Israel as a nation and of the majority of the individuals in that nation, and that he was desiring their salvation. Now, let us see if he stops talking about salvation in verses 6 through 8. Obviously, he is still talking about salvation in these verses because he's talking about who constitutes the true Israel, the true seed of Abraham, to whom the promise of salvation was given. Give me chart 73. Notice Isaiah 45 verse 17. But Israel shall be saved in the Lord with an everlasting salvation. You shall not be ashamed nor confounded, world without end. That's what Paul is affirming in Romans 9, 10, and 11, because look how he concludes. And so all Israel shall be saved, just like God said in Isaiah 45, 17. His objector, though, is thinking that when God says all Israel shall be saved, he's referring to the physical descendants. But he's not. So who are the Israel? They're not all Israel, which are Israel. So Paul, from this point on, is going to tell you, let me tell you who the true Israel of God is, who the true seed of Abraham is. And while I'm on these verses here, verses 6 through 8, I couldn't believe Bruce got up and says, well, Isaac was chosen to be a child of promise, and that had nothing to do with salvation. And that being a child of promise was not the same thing as being a child of God. I couldn't believe my ears because I've emphasized that. Look at that verse. In fact, let me see if I got the chart on Romans 9 that we can go to. Give me chart 40. No, that's not it. Well, no time to look for it. I had the whole 9th chapter there on some chart. But anyway, notice what Paul says. They which are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise. Do you see how child of God is equated with child of promise? And yet, Bruce, you get right up here and say child of promise is not equal to child of God. And yet, right in that passage, Paul makes them equal. If you're a child of God, you're a child of promise. If you're a child of promise, you're a child of God. Now, you want to take that back? Let's go back to chart 73, brother. Oh, you're already there. Good. The question Paul addresses in Romans 9 concerns whether this word of promise has failed or will fail. Paul does not deny that all fleshly Israel will be saved, but in fact, he affirms such. What he does deny, as I said, is that the terms Israel and seed of Abraham refer to the literal descendants. Thus, if we ask Paul the question, Paul, do you believe that all Israel will be saved or not? Well, Paul would respond by saying it depends on how you define the terms Israel and seed of Abraham. If we define those terms as denoting the physical descendants of those patriarchs, then no, all Israel, no, all the seed of Abraham will not be saved. But if we define those terms as referring to all those individuals whom God chose to salvation, to all believers in Jesus, then yes, all Israel, all the seed of Abraham will be saved. Paul's proposition then is to affirm that all Israel, all the seed of Abraham will be saved. That this is his chief proposition is clear, as I said, from Romans 11:26, where he sums up his case saying, and so all Israel shall be saved. He is saying all the true Israel of God will be saved, but not all the physical members of the nation of Israel. So, in these verses 6 through 8, he's still clearly talking about salvation when he says they are not all Israel, which are of Israel. He's still dealing with the question of the salvation of Israel that God had promised in Isaiah 45:17. He identifies the term Israel and seed of Abraham with those who are children of the promise or children of God. How can we deny that these are terms connected with salvation? Since the terms Israel and seed of Abraham in the mind of God did not denote all the physical descendants of Abraham and Israel, then who does these terms describe? If fleshly descent is not the criterion for determining inclusion in this group, then what criterion does determine who is included and who is not? Paul addressed this point. He affirms that the choice of the individual is what determines whether he is an Israelite or seed of Abraham. He demonstrates this from the case of Isaac. Isaac was a child of promise or child of God. And why was he such? Because Isaac willed and worked to become such? Because of Isaac's choice to become such, or solely because of God's choice for Isaac to become such? Who is reckoned or counted as the seed? Paul says that God's choice of a person is what makes him part of the group called the seed. So clearly these verses are still dealing with salvation, with who constitutes the chosen seed to whom the promises of salvation belong. And tomorrow night I'm going to pick up where I left off right here.